Hey class, welcome back to Mr. Lawhon's AP European History class, European History Notes, whatever this is that we're doing here. Welcome back. Yesterday in 2.3, if you listen to the notes, we talked about the decline of Italian city-states, right? If you remember, France is going to invade Italy because there's beef between Milan and Naples. France jumps on Milan's side, but they just go in and invade all of, most of the Italian city-states. And then the Kingdom of Aragon comes down and they jump in on the action. They try to grab up city-states. And then greedy, corrupt popes try to grab up land in northern Italy. But bottom line, Italy is in pieces after all these foreign invasions. And what you see is the decline of power of these Italian city-states. So what we're going to do today is we're going to move a little bit past Italy, and we're going to start talking about other European, not nations yet, but other European places. So essential question 2.4 is, what were the characteristics of the new monarchies, and how were they different from previous monarchies? The term new monarchies is something that you need to know in AP. It's one of those AP standards. If you look at the front of the room, it has things that you need to talk about in every unit, right? Well, the new monarchies are just one of those things. So pause if you need to, and let's talk about what these new monarchies were. Okay, before we can talk about the new monarchies, we need to talk about what it is that the new monarchies are doing. And that is they are centralizing their power. What's the root word of centralize? Center. So they're taking power that is everywhere and they're placing it in the center. Who is going to be the center of this power? Kings and queens, monarchs, okay? So what does it mean to centralize power? If you remember from previous notes, I don't know when it was, but we talked about how medieval Europe was a feudal society, right? And in a feudal society, power was not located or centralized in only the king. Power was spread out through different nobles who controlled their own land. Do you guys remember every noble controlled their piece of land? And on their land, they got to kind of make up the rules and make up their own taxes and make up their own laws, and they had their own armies, and they had what's called autonomy. Autonomy means they did their own thing, kind of. Did they have a king? Yeah, they acknowledged that there was a king, but they had a lot of power over their own land. So, one of the things that's going to set the new monarchies apart is nobles are going to lose power over time. Now, many European nations at this time have representative assemblies that work together with monarchs. What a representative assembly is, it means like nobles get together for England in a parliament, and they get together with the king, and they kind of work things out. They work out laws and taxes or whatever. In France, they have this thing that's called the Estates General, which are made up of representatives from all different parts of society, representatives of the nobles, representatives of the middle classes and the lower classes and the church. They all get together and they kind of talk things out. In Spain, they're going to have their meetings called the Cortes. But bottom line is, all of these areas have these representative governments where nobles and kings share power. But that is finna change. All right. Now, what do they do in these representative assemblies? Like I said, they work out laws and they work out taxes in together with the king. Here's the deal, though. If you remember, during the Renaissance, wealthy merchants are growing in power. Monarchs are going to start using wealthy merchants instead of nobles to start staffing their royal offices. Now, what that means is usually the king and his court were made up of the king and nobles. But the problem is, merchants, wealthy merchants, bankers, business people that know how to run a business and therefore probably know how to run a nation are going to start being hired on by these kings for their knowledge, and they've got a lot of money that they can back the king with. So what I'm starting to tell you is kings are going to start looking for allies not among the nobles anymore because they fight for power, but instead among these wealthy merchants. There are some times that the king will even give titles to these wealthy people. So merchants aren't nobles, right? But a king might, to honor these wealthy merchants, give them a title of nobility. And now they can own land, and now they can be a noble. So what you see here are these wealthy merchants, these townspeople. Another name for them is burghers because they come from a burg or city. They're going to start rising in power and being allies to the king. Monarchs are going to start not meeting with nobles. England has a parliament, but you're going to see the king is going to be like, I don't need those guys. I've got my homies that are bankers that can finance stuff for me. And they're going to start raising money without their help. And they're going to start relying on hired professional armies for the military. Traditionally, monarchs would use nobles and their forces to go fight. But since nobles are kind of untrustworthy because they're vying for power, you start to hire your own professional armies. You start to create standing armies that are always ready to go. You see, back in the day when you wanted to fight a war, you had to do what's called conscription, which means draft everybody to fight. Well, that's kind of inefficient. What if you had people whose only job it was to be paid and trained to be in the military? Wouldn't that be a better army? So kings are going to start using professional armies. So, bottom line in all of this is power is going to go from noble landowners, and instead of power being dispersed between a lot of different people, power is slowly going to become centralized into one place, and that one place is the monarch. Now, on the next several slides, we're going to talk about how different nations are going to centralize their power. Pause if you need to. The first place we're going to talk about is France. Now, we've talked about France before, right? We talked about the 100 Years' War. We talked about Joan of Arc. But France, right here on this map, guys, is going to, like everybody, slowly start centralizing their power. And it kind of starts with this guy named Charles VII. Well, I told you one of the things that European monarchs are going to kind of realize is that why am I going to use my nobles' armies to fight? Because they're kind of unreliable and untrustworthy. Why don't I create a professional fighting force that gets paid to train and fight, and I know they're going to be loyal, and I know they're going to do a good job? So, Charles VII creates a permanent army in France, and he's going to develop a strong economy. That's one of the ways, guys, he is going to centralize power, but there's something else he's going to do. You see, there's this place right next to France called Burgundy. It's right here on this map in the circle. There's this guy named Charles the Bold. He is the Duke of Burgundy, the Duchy of Burgundy. You might be like, well, hon, what the heck is a duchy? It's land that a duke or a noble controls. So the Duchy of Burgundy is land that the Duke of Burgundy controls. The Duke is like a wealthy noble that controls this land, right? So Charles the Bold is the Duke of Burgundy, this area right here. And Charles the Bold kind of has these aspirations or these desires to build a new kingdom, not English, not French, but Burgundian. He wants to build kind of a kingdom of Burgundy. Well, if he did that, that would be a rival to France right next door. I mean, look at that on the map. Right next door to France, guys, Burgundy would be a rival. So, like I said, Charles the Bold was the Duke of a territory called Burgundy, and he was trying to make his territory into a kingdom, which would have definitely been a rival to the French. So, when the Duke of Burgundy rises up and makes his kind of desires known, it frightens a lot of people. The French are like, we don't need a rival person so close to our borders. Other people join France in kind of beating this guy down. But bottom line is, the Duke of Burgundy is defeated. He's killed in battle. And guess what happens? France dissolves its lands and France becomes bigger. France gets most of the lands of Burgundy. Wow, good job. Now France is expanding. They're centralizing land and power. So this doubled the land of France, and it ended the threat, allowing France to expand its trade and expand its influence. With the Duke of Burgundy no longer blocking trade, now, guys, the French can have more power over their economy. So this is one way that the French are going to kind of centralize their power by fighting Burgundy and taking more land and being able to expand their trade and influence. And also, Charles VII started to use his own professional hired armies. Pause if you need to. Okay, let's move into Spain. The only problem is Spain doesn't exist yet. Prior to 1469, Spain was divided up between a couple different kingdoms and a couple different groups, but the two major kingdoms were Castile and Aragon. If you look at this map right here, you've got Castile and Aragon. You've got a couple other areas up to the north. Portugal is a separate kingdom to the west, and underneath you've got Grenada. All right, Granada. And Grenada, that's the same place. Anyway, Grenada, potato, whatever. Grenada was kind of controlled by this group called the Moors. Now, let me explain what that is in a second, okay? But bottom line is, look, in 1469, the king of Aragon, Ferdinand, and the queen of Castile, Isabella, are going to get married. And when they do that, they unite the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon into what we call España. We call it Spain, right? So this is where Spain becomes a thing when these two kingdoms are united. Now, there's only one other problem. Like I said, number one, this created a new power in Europe. And the French and the English and other groups, they didn't really want these kingdoms to unite because, once again, that's rival powers, rival land, rival territories. And for this new big kingdom to grow out, that might cause problems among other people in Europe. Now, by unifying, like I said, they brought their kingdoms under the control of the monarch. Just like everywhere else, they were living under feudalism. Nobles had a lot of power. They were kind of doing their own thing. And when they united, now they centralize their power in the monarchy. Now, here's the big deal. Long story short, without going into too much history, Spain and Portugal had been controlled by the Moors, or Muslims. If you go way back, beginning in around the 800s, Islam became a thing in the 600s, right? But beginning the 800s, Muslims created this huge empire where they controlled parts of Eastern Europe, they conquered the Middle East, they conquered parts of North Africa, and then Muslims invaded Spain. They tried to invade France, but they were stopped by an army. Bottom line is, Muslims controlled this huge territory until about the 1300s. Guess what happens in the 1300s? The Mongols. The Mongols come in, Genghis Khan and those guys, and they conquer all this land and they take it from Muslim control. But Muslims or Moors are still in control of Spain. So when Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile unite, one of the things is they're going to turn their attention towards the Muslims. Because remember, Spain, Europeans are Christian, they're Catholics, right? And guys, Islam is a rival religion to them, okay? So, Ferdinand and Isabella, another way they're going to centralize power is they're going to create something that is infamous. It is notorious, and it is called the Inquisition, all right? They're going to appoint clergy to a church institution called the Inquisition. Now, you might be like, what is the Inquisition? Well, because there are so many Muslims in Spain, and they represent a threat to unity of Spanish Christians, they are going to go on the hunt for not only Muslims, but Jews. There's a lot of Jewish people in Spain. So what the job of the Inquisition is, it was led by this guy named Tomás de Torquemada. And the Inquisition guys, they're going to like spy on people. They're going to monitor Jews and Muslims in Spain. Sometimes they're going to confiscate the land of Jews and Muslims. Sometimes they're going to bring Jews and Muslims into these dungeons and torture them unless they convert to Christianity. So it's a pretty brutal thing, the Inquisition. They took property from Jews and Muslims, they arrested, they tortured them, and they forced them to convert to Christianity. And if they didn't, they would either be exiled or they might be killed. So, guys, that's what the Inquisition is. Now, it starts in Spain, but pretty soon the Inquisition is going to spread to all parts of Europe. And you're going to see in later chapters, the Inquisition is not just going to target Jews and Muslims, it's going to target other groups that the Catholic Church does not agree with. So, this is one way that Ferdinand and Isabella centralized their power, is they created the Inquisition to root out enemies of the church. But they also centralized power by uniting their kingdoms together and creating Spain. Pause if you need to. Oh, wait, one more thing. A united Spain, once they become united, is going to begin exploring North America and conquering its people and wealth, leading Spain to become a huge world power, at least for a while. But we're going to talk about that in another lesson towards the end of this chapter. Now, pause if you need to. Moving on to England. Well, after the 100 Years' War that we talked about in the last chapter, England, you would think they'd be unified, but they were still divided by lords and nobles all fighting for power. Okay, so remember, just because they fought a war with the French doesn't mean they all walk around and say, yay, we're all English now. Not true. They're still divided by nobles vying for power. So there were these series of civil wars called the War of the Roses. And this happened, and it was called the War of the Roses because the two noble houses that were fighting were the House of Lancaster and the House of York. And they both had roses for their house symbol. One was a white rose, one was a red rose, and that was like their house's symbol. So that's why it's called the War of the Roses. So you have these two noble houses and their armies duking it out for control of England. Once again, guys, they're not unified. So if you look at this map, guys, roughly the dark orange areas are the parts of England that the Lancaster house controls, and the kind of beige areas are the House of York. So if you can see, England's kind of a mess being divided up by these two houses. So you can see, guys, why they might fight because their lands are confusing and right up next to each other. So long story short, although the wars are fun to talk about and there's all kinds of intrigue, including kings killing other people's sons in pretty brutal ways, the wars are going to end with this guy named Henry Tudor on the throne, named Henry VII, and he's going to end up on the throne of England, starting this thing called the Tudor dynasty. Now, the Tudor dynasty, guys, is going to be legendary in other chapters, but just remember, this is kind of where it begins. Henry Tudor is now on the throne. Now, are English people still divided? Well, yeah, they just fought a war and there's still a lot of bad blood going around, all right? So, to unite England and secure his dynasty and centralize power, Henry, from the House of Lancaster, married Elizabeth from the House of York, one of his rival's daughters. So now you've got York and Lancaster being united in marriage and ruling together. All right, that's one way to centralize your power. Is you say, "Hey, I'm going to marry a rival of my rival house," right? And then you kind of bring the country back together. Now, another way that Henry centralized power is he brought rival nobles under his control by creating this thing called the Court of Star Chamber or the Star Chamber. So here's the deal. Remember how I told you that nobles in all different parts of lands kind of control their own laws, they control their own lands, they control their own taxes? Well, guess what else they control is the courts. So one of the things that English nobles used to do with lots of money when they went to court and they were accused of doing something bad, they would just bribe the court and judges, or they would intimidate the court and judges into getting a ruling that they liked. Now, that gives the nobles a lot of power. Let's say the king tries to convict a noble of a crime that they committed, and the noble bribes these judges, he gets off, right? Well, here's the deal. The king starts saying, what if I created my own court that I controlled? And that, guys, is called the Star Court. What did the Star Court do? Well, guys, it was just a court where the king controlled who the judges were. So when a noble was accused of a crime, they couldn't bribe the king's judges because they were under the influence of the king. What does this do? Well, guys, it brought the nobles under the king's control and it centralized power in the English king. Think about it now. If you're the noble, you can't bribe anybody anymore because all the courts are run by the king. Once again, it's a way that power was centralized, right? Taken from the nobility and focused in the center of the monarch. Now, Henry also confiscated nobles' lands that committed crimes and did things he didn't like. And by doing so, and partnering with wealthy bankers and wealthy merchants, he even started to do things without calling Parliament. He started to kind of rule without Parliament, all right? Because you call Parliament to raise money. Hey, guys, I need money from the nobles. He didn't need that anymore because he had wealthy merchants and bankers as his new allies. So he was able to even govern without Parliament. Once again, centralizing power. Pause if you need to. Okay, the last place we're going to talk about is the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the heck is the Holy Roman Empire, Lohan? I have never heard of that in my life. Well, guys, I feel like because of a meme, I have to say that the Holy Roman Empire was neither Roman nor was it holy. I don't know. That's just an old meme. But anyway, what is the Holy Roman Empire? You see this big blob of different colors right smack dab in the middle of Europe. You see, guys, this right here on the left is France. It's in German. This is France, guys. This up here, north would be England. Up here, and that's Denmark. But like way up to the northwest, that would be England. This big blob is the Holy Roman Empire. Okay? It is a large mass of different autonomy, right? States doing their own thing, different autonomous states in Central Europe. Now, some people in here kind of are German, And that's kind of what they call themselves. But there is no Germany yet. Some people are Italian, but remember, there is no unified Italy yet. Some people are going to be Austrian, okay? But bottom line is, those eventually become future German nations in like the 1800s. But right now, it is a big blob of mess being ruled by a whole bunch of different people. Now, each state was controlled by a local noble, but there was this emperor called the Holy Roman Emperor, and they did exist, and they did have some political power, and they did have some religious power. Okay? So all of these states, and there's a lot of them, as you can see from the map, are kind of doing their own thing, but they all kind of acknowledge there is a Holy Roman Emperor. And the Holy Roman Emperor comes from a family called the Habsburgs. Remember that name. We're going to talk about them a lot later. But the Habsburgs are these powerful rulers of the Holy Roman Empire. All right, now, the emperor was elected by nobles from different states. So there was kind of a meeting of the different states, and they would hold, this gathering, and they would say, hey, we're going to elect a new emperor. So once again, the emperor gets their power from the nobles electing them, right? And then, guys, in the 1400s, up in the northern parts, what we would call the German states, they created an assembly called the Reichstag, which was created, guys, in which the emperor and the princess kind of worked together to solve the problems of the Holy Roman Empire. But here's the deal. Who controls who gets to be emperor? All the different nobles that get together and vote, right? So let me ask you something. Do you think the Holy Roman Emperor was very good at centralizing power? And the answer is, how can you centralize power when there are hundreds of different little bitty autonomous states doing their own thing? And the answer is, you can't. So the Holy Roman Empire is just a huge mess. And basically, it's so divided, it's really hard to centralize power. And you're going to see for the longest time, the Holy Roman Empire is going to struggle while all the other nations that are able to centralize power are going to grow and become powerful. Well, guys, I hope you see what centralization means. And all of these groups are called the new monarchs because the new monarchies have more power than the old monarchies. The new monarchies are doing things on their own because they've centralized power. And the old monarchies had to rely on nobles. So I hope you guys now see the difference. I'll see you in class.